Hi, and welcome back to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cush, or Biz, better known as Biz, and I just appreciate that you're here. If this is your first time listening, or someone has shared the podcast with you, if you're a longtime listener, I'm just so appreciative that you're here and hanging out with me. And today we've got an amazing guest, which I'm super excited about. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to say that um, my work is evolving. I am really trying to hone in on how I do the work I do. I mean, like I know it in my soul, but to communicate it is often so much harder. And so I've been working with my coaches trying to better define what I do. And although, as like what I feel like it's termed, it's like I coach, I'm a life coach for highly sensitive women. But the work that I ultimately do is guidance, mentorship, and support. And I think that defines me and my work so much more accurately because I am not a person that's going to tell you what to do. I am not like coaching you. I am listening. I am providing feedback. I am tuning into your energy. I'm reading what I'm interpreting, what my intuition is telling me, and I am guiding you with that. So, if you're interested in knowing more about working with me, you can find me at elizabethcushcoaching.com or just elizabethcush.com. That's me. And yeah, you can also find me at Progression Counseling, and that is my therapy space where I work with clients from Maryland and Delaware. And yeah, that's where you find me. Also on Instagram at Awaken Your Wise Woman. So without further ado, we've got Andrea Nakayama here today to talk about her work with in functional medicine, both training others, but also her perspective on the medical world, diagnosis, what it means to fully better understand your own system in order to heal and support yourself. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful conversation. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts about it. If it really lands with you, please reach out on social media or send me an email, get on my newsletter. You can also stay up to date with me and my newsletter. So thanks for listening, but let's jump into this conversation with Andrea Nakayama. Hi, Andrea. So, welcome to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. It's really great to have you here. For listeners who don't know who you are, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and, yeah, why you do what you do.
Oh, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here and looking forward to our discussion. So, I'm Andrea Nakayama. I'm a functional medicine nutritionist and founder of the Functional Nutrition Alliance, where I train providers from all different backgrounds to be functional nutrition counselors. So I train them in the science and the art of the functional nutrition practice. And I came to this work through a recognition of many of the gaps in healthcare. And this happened when my late husband, Isamu, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor called a glioblastoma multiforme when I was just 7 weeks pregnant in April of 2000. And so we were in our early 30s that kind of catapulted us into the medical system in ways we had never experienced. And so I was encountering these very obvious, glaring gaps. And the two original gaps that I just want to point out, because I'm not here to bash our medical system, it does an amazing job at particular things and falls short in other areas. But those two original gaps that really inspired me to eventually go on and do the work I do now were that people are treated like their diagnosis. So if we have IBS or Crohn's or cancer or diabetes, we are treated like our diagnosis, not like a person who has a diagnosis. And at the same time, in the way our medical system works, everybody with the same diagnosis is treated the same. There is a protocol for how a diagnosis is treated. And there's a place and time for that, but there's a lot to the human condition that extends beyond the diagnosis. And so those were the original inspirations for the work I do. I lost my husband 2.5 years after his diagnosis. He was actually given 6 months to live. So we were able to extend his life. He was able to have an imprint on our son's life, who's now a young adult. And there was a lot of richness and beauty in that time together, but it really became a calling for me that put me back through school and many
Mm.
iterations to do the work I do now.
Mm. Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about the, sort of being treated like a diagnosis. And I feel like that is also so prevalent in the mental health world,
Absolutely.
right? Like I'm bipolar or I'm
Yes.
depressed versus I have depression, I have bipolar disorder. Like it becomes it's not a condition, it becomes who you are. And it's how from working with clients, I know it can influence how prescribers or psychiatrists or whatever interact with the client, like to see them in this sort of slot of who they are. So yes, I feel that, and it has really pushed me to learn more about energy healing and, doing more holistic ways of, and sharing that here on the podcast too. But so I have two things that are popping up for me. Like some of our listeners may not know what functional medicine is, which I
Yes.
would love for you to talk about. But two, I don't want to forget talking about, I mean, this season we're really focusing on highly sensitive women. And so I'd love for
Mm,
you to share a little bit about that. So whatever
yes.
feels most natural for you right at this moment feels,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So, very simply, functional medicine embraces three primary tenets. And those three tenets are a therapeutic partnership. So, I interpret that to elevate the role of the patient and the way they can
Mm.
actually be a part of the partnership. We often look to our providers to be the God and to be the know alls. And instead, they're a guide. And the more we're tuned into ourselves and can show up and be in tune with what we're representing, the better partner we can be. So, tenet number one in a truly functional practice is a therapeutic partnership, both people being a partner and respecting the role of the other. Tenet
Mm.
number two is looking for the root causes. There's a lot of misuse of that terminology these days, and I want to really underscore that I'm saying plural root causes. There is no
Mm.
one root cause. I have a lot of concern that particularly sensitive women are seeking that one root that puts them in a sympathetic, dominant, seeking state for what's going on with them that also isn't conducive to healing. So, looking for the root
Oh, interesting.
causes helps
Yeah.
us to ask, why is this happening? Not just what do I do about it? And there's a time and a place for both. I think they work in tandem. Tenet number three is a systems based approach. And in functional medicine, a truly functional practice, we are looking through the lens of systems biology. And Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's one of the founders of the field of functional medicine, is a systems biologist. So when I say that, we're bringing into recognition that the gut's connected to the brain and the brain to the gut, that the gut is connected to the liver and detoxification, and that detoxification impacts our hormones and our neurohormones. It's seeing the body through a more holistic lens. As a result, I have a lot of mental health practitioners who go through my training because there's more awareness of these interconnections. In
Mm.
addition to the systems biology, I also like to think about mental models or systems theories that allow us to go into first principle thinking. Basically, what are the easy ways we can address complex problems? Because part of what keeps us in a mode of being anxious is that huge complexity of it. We're expecting ourselves to summit Mount Everest every day, and nobody does that in a day. They don't do it in weeks. It takes years, and there's a lot of base camps along the way. And so
Mm.
just coming back to how do we break down what feels really, really complex to give ourselves another way in? So that's like a adjacent for me aspect of this systems biology. So again, a truly functional practice embraces therapeutic partnerships, looking for the root causes, which means we ask, why is this happening? Not just what do I do about it? And a systems based approach, which primarily respects the science and the evidence behind systems biology.
Mm. So, like systems, meaning our systems, our internal
Exactly. Yes.
systems. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I love how you look at certain internal systems in your work
yeah.
and the internal family systems. And what
Oh,
I
totally.
teach is like full body systems, right? So I'm
Yes.
looking at how do all these aspects intersect
Mm.
together. And I
Mm.
have a functional nutrition matrix that I divide into three sections: the story, the soup, and the skill. And the soup section is that body systems because it's all mixed up in there. It's not our gut and our brain and our hormones, it's all
All of it.
together in there. So that's the soup portion of the matrix. And we can get into the story and the skill as they may be applicable for sensitive
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, and I don't have research on this, so I can't say this is necessarily true, but based on my work with clients, so many highly sensitive women and probably men too have some form of chronic illness that is associated with potentially their life circumstances, whether they've had trauma or just disrupted periods of their lives, right? And I just wonder if, what's I've been getting curious about is like being highly sensitive as a trait, right? Like a
Yes.
biological trait. Does that also, and I don't know that you have the answer to this, but
Mm-hmm.
does that also impact our biology, right? Are our
Mm-hmm.
systems that much
Mm-hmm.
more sensitive to disruption or what we're eating or what we're ingesting, what we're exposed to in the environment?
Yeah, and I think that's such a good question, Elizabeth. And really, when we think about the use case of functional nutrition, it is more geared towards somebody who is sick and not getting better. So somebody who's experiencing chronic health issues. Otherwise, like who wants to do all this work, right? Like it's work that is meant for those who are like hitting the wall. I think of it as in general, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of people can do something that's in a book or on a blog or even a TikTok or Instagram and feel somewhat better. But there's 20% who aren't going to experience that. I do think that as we age, that 80-20 flips, especially
Mm,
for women,
hmm.
because we are more sensitive because of a lot of different hormonal changes that are pretty complicated on top of the lived experiences or insults and joys we've experienced throughout life. So, functional nutrition is a place for those who are addressing chronic health challenges, to settle a little bit more into a different way of approaching them. And that's my sweet spot. I
Mm,
love working with people who are having to untangle complex factors. And absolutely. So when I talk about the story and the skill on either side of that soup, those areas are flanking the internal body systems, the physiology, our biology. So the story in functional medicine is what we term the antecedents, the triggers, and the mediators, the ATMs. The antecedents are the things that we just come into the world with. They may be our genes or genetic predispositions, how we were born, the order we were born in, whether we were breastfed or not. But those factors, including historical, ancestral, epigenetic factors, come with us to make us who we are. The triggers are the things that happen throughout our lifespan that have impacted, again, I used the word insult, that have impacted our bodies. And the mediators are the things that we know help us feel better or make us feel worse. I
mm,
see my job as helping people to find more of their mediators, not to fix them. We're
yeah,
not broken. We are not broken, but to
yeah.
help us find more of the things that we can carry around that help us feel better or make us feel worse. And some of that may come from inquiry into what you so wisely brought up. Like if you were to say, I've always been sensitive, I want to know, what does that mean?
Mm,
Sensitive how? I want to understand that relationship to self, that
mm-hmm.
self diagnosis or prognosis or identity, and
Sure.
how that has manifested for you. Because absolutely there is a tie to what's happening physiologically. That was a long answer, but I wanted to kind of paint the picture for us to see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and that makes so much sense to me that like I mean, I'm just thinking about myself, right? Like there are certain well, I will own that I have diverticulitis, right? So this is a chronic condition that can flare up at times when I don't expect it. But I'm recognizing too that for me, the awareness around my stressors, how
Yes.
I'm managing them, but also what I'm putting in my body
Yes.
and what I'm doing with my body. Am I exercising? Am I moving? Am I getting enough rest? Right.
Yes. Yes.
So it just makes so much sense to me that yes, probably some of this is inherited and genetic, and there are things that I can do to help mediate.
Exactly. So that left side of the functional nutrition matrix is the story. We talked about the soup. The skill includes sleep and relaxation, exercise and movement, nutrition and hydration, stress and resilience, relationships and networks, right? Those are the skills, and there's no perfect there. Our goal is to think, what am I doing now? What do I recognize helps me feel better or makes me feel worse? And is there a next step that makes sense for me? Once we have our mediators, Elizabeth, this is where I feel like real empowerment comes into play, because we get to make decisions in a risk reward fashion. And
Mm,
let's say somebody knows that if they drink a glass of red wine, they're not going to sleep as well that night. And then their hunger mechanisms are off the next day. It doesn't feel good. But there's a social situation and they want to partake in it. And they make that decision knowing that that's empowerment. That's not being
mm,
bad. That's about saying there's a risk reward, cost benefit situation here that I get to make for myself, because I know drinking that glass of red wine is going to have this impact, but I'm going to embrace it. And, you know, for me, that glass of red wine is not worth it. Like the risk reward I'm
It's
not
too
going to
great.
have it.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that becomes a decision. And there's a point where we make different decisions that aren't about being on a diet or having
Mm,
to adhere to a very strict protocol. And there's a time and a place for that too, with the help of a provider.
sure.
But it's really helping us live into the full reality without that constant quest for just making it go away, which sometimes isn't the opportunity we have. If it's a mental health issue, if it's a chronic health issue, there are going to be flares, there are going to be triggers. And
Yeah.
how do we live into it?
Well, and I love the idea of the risk reward in terms of how much shame can show up around the decisions that we make,
Yes.
especially I think if we're not making the decisions consciously, if like we get into a situation, say using your example where we're socializing and there's wine and you drink too much, then there's just like the next day or that night or whatever it is, you don't sleep well, you feel bad, the shame shows up versus like being present in the decision making before it happens,
Yes.
and giving
And the
yourself
feedback
permission
loop
or
after.
not.
Yes, exactly. And that feedback loop
Yeah.
afterwards, like, oh,
Yes.
here's that thing. This is what's happening. Just even noticing in ourselves where we get amped up, like where certain emotions are showing up and being able to witness them, which I'm sure you do a much better job in practice than I'm looking to do, but just seeing those things as impactful to what happens after that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
shame, as an example, where does that live in us? And then what happens with the shame as opposed to the recognition of the shame as a response on top of feeling tired, having low blood sugar, so eating more to try to keep ourselves awake because we didn't sleep well. Like there's a lot of feedback loops. And I feel like if we
Mm,
could just not hyper fixate on them like we're gazing at our belly buttons, but just be with them and witness them. That to me is the definition of health more than some perfect way of either living or feeling.
yeah. I think that's so important too, because the perfection isn't really attainable, right? I mean,
No.
there's no, well, and we're all so different. Each person as a human is so different. So what
Yes.
works for me doesn't, yeah, not that there's a perfect, but yeah, yeah. And
But
we're
that's not what
fallible
we're fed
humans, right?
today, right? That's not, I feel like both
Yeah.
in medicine, with there being a protocol and the quest often that we're on that I spoke to earlier for finding the
The cure.
remedy, the
Yeah.
cure for
Yeah.
whatever it is we're feeling, like that has then leaked into more integrative, holistic, functional alternative practices as well. So people are seeking what is the thing that's going to make this go away, which also keeps us from that parasympathetic dominant rest and digest state of watching, witnessing, being with, learning. It's
Mm,
so pervasive that we're told we're supposed to be doing it a certain way, or we haven't found the way, whether it's a pill, a protocol, a practitioner that's going to solve it all, as opposed to
mm,
being with it all.
mm. Yeah. And that just feels like so relevant in terms of like social media to me, like that
Yes.
seeking, whether it's a video or a practitioner or an influencer or whatever it is, like trying to find that one thing that's gonna like fix me or,
Yes.
help me fix me.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I really hadn't thought about, even though of course it makes sense, but thought about that sort of seeking of like what's going to fix me, keeping you in that and in that sympathetic nervous system, hyper aware of like what's wrong with me and how do I fix it versus can I just be with what I have and how do I manage that versus how do
Exactly.
I fix it?
Manage, mitigate, witness,
Yes.
be aware, make decisions, take what I've
Mm,
learned, kind of cultivate the soil of our human condition,
yeah.
really recognizing our own terrain as opposed to that completely external. Um, I see this too, Elizabeth, with not just pills and protocols and practitioners, but also with tests, wearables, scales, like all the information that we're fed outside of ourselves keeps us from the opportunity to tune into ourselves because we're basing our sense of self on external factors that could be clues, but that's not the way they've been positioned for us. So I see a lot of sensitive women really alarmed or scared of seeing their lab work.
Oh,
And I've
yes. Oh,
devised ways
yes.
that we look at labs to show more of what is working instead of just hyper focusing on what's not working. I mean, my mom, who will be 86 this year, she gets so nervous about her lab work, and she has probably the best lab work of anybody I ever seen. But
Yeah,
she's so nervous about it because she thinks it's going to tell her she's dying or something's wrong with her. And
totally.
I see this pervasive in people of all ages, but that's the way we show up with our providers. Our providers just tell us what's in out of range as
That's
opposed to
true.
first talking about, hey,
The,
you wouldn't be sitting here with me if your body wasn't primarily functioning for you.
yes. Yes. Well, and I think that message gets lost with nutrition, with, yes, the external, like you should be monitoring your glucose every minute of every day. You should be eating this particular diet. Like, or you should be fasting, or you should, like, there's this missed message that, like, our bodies are amazing
Yes.
and know how to filter toxins. And sure,
Yes.
is there a place for detox? Maybe. I don't know. I don't do it, but, but, but like our bodies know how to keep us alive for the most
Yes.
part. I mean, there are things that enter into our systems that are not healthy and,
Yes. Yeah,
but
there's
yeah,
a time and a place for it all, right? My answer to everything in relation to like, should we detox? It's like, it depends. We have detoxification organs that do
hmm
the job for us. Your best forms of detoxification from a functional nutrition lens are sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance, which we don't need to measure every second of every day to
right,
support.
right.
But those are our best ways of detoxing. Are there times when the organs need a
Mm,
helping hand? Yeah, there may be with the help of somebody who understands what they're doing, but it's always it depends
yeah,
situation when it comes to health, but that's not what we're being fed with all the media and social media and the quote unquote wellness industry, which is a
yeah.
very commercialized industry to keep us in this questing state. And so
Mm,
in addition to functional medicine nutrition, my practice has moved towards the practice of narrative medicine, which really brings it back to the story, which I think is a missing component in
yeah,
our health and healing journey.
yeah. Well, I think about the impact of um, identifying too strongly with the story, right? Like when the studies around mindfulness-based stress reduction, like that if we can kind of detach ourselves from the story or the pain or the story around the pain, right? Um, so much can shift. I
Yeah.
had two conversations this week with people and noticed myself too, like when something else is going on, like I've been having some, I think it's arthritis in my foot. I'm going to go see the doctor later this week, but that pain was so prevalent. But then I got sick and I was throwing
Mhm.
up. And suddenly I didn't even notice the pain in my foot because there was
Mm,
other stuff happening internally and maybe inflammation changed or whatever. But
yes.
as soon as I started feeling better, I was like, oh, there's my foot again.
Right. Yeah, I can totally relate to this. When my late husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor again,
Mm.
I was 7 weeks pregnant. I was going through what felt like horrible morning sickness. Like,
Oh my
oh, poor
gosh.
me. I can't keep anything down. And then we're faced with a, acute situation, and like my morning sickness was, it was there, but it was, like you said, completely manageable because the situation we were facing was so much bigger. And when I think about narrative and story, there's our hyperfixation and over identification with the story we tell ourselves, but I also think there are stories in us that are part of our medicine that may get illuminated or gently poked through ways that are unexpected, through being moved by something. I just wrote an article on the medicine in belonging. I really
Mm.
believe that there is a pharmacy within us that has as much, if not more, power and potential to shift our internal terrain and factors like inflammation than the fish oil or the turmeric or whatever the anti-inflammatory drug is that we're going to take. It's
Yeah.
in us in some ways too. And I think that when we can sit with it again, like if we think about the medicine in belonging, and you and I can savor the moment that we are having together and what it feels like to speak to a like-minded woman, that is has healing power. When we're sensitive, being able to tap into, where am I moved, where am I belonging, where am I experiencing joy, and actually savoring those moments. The science does show us the physiological impact of those emotions. Belonging, as an example, turns off inflammatory genes that contribute to inflammatory markers in the bloodstream. And loneliness, as I'm sure you know, has the opposite effect. But belonging can
Mm.
also be something we experience one on one, in community, in nature, in the water, and just like having it fully permeate your cells when you're
Mm.
experiencing it and savoring is medicine.
Yeah. I love that word, savoring. Yeah. Well, funny because I was thinking about this morning. I was walking and one of my favorite walks, and part of it takes me through a marsh. I get to look across the expanse with the water and the grasses, and it just fills me in a way that I don't really understand. And they change, changes with the season. So sometimes the marsh grass is green and sometimes it's brown. And it just, yeah, it just does something. Yeah, it's a sense of belonging in the
Yes,
world, right?
yes, yeah, and of being moved, of seeing
Yes.
nature and like being moved. And
Yeah.
there's so many impacts of just like sitting in that moment and taking it in. Um,
Mm,
and that's where I just really feel like we're missing the humanity in health. We've
yeah.
lost our way.
Yeah. Mm, I feel that so much. Uh, Andrea, I feel so grateful for having this conversation with you. I don't know. There are times when, someone will reach out to be a guest, and I'm like, I don't know if this is a good fit, but we'll try it. We'll see. And it's such a pleasure when it's like, oh, this was so easy. And I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like it just touched all the right parts of me. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it as well. It's lovely to be in this level of conversation. And I think that the depth, just coming back to the highly sensitive woman, I mean, sensitivity shows up in a number of different ways. And I just want to acknowledge that it can show up in our mental state and our mood, but sensitivity can definitely show up in our bodies if we're hyper reactive to a lot of foods or a lot of situations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just really honoring that sensitivity because it is there to tell us something. And I think it starts raising its voice when we don't just hear what it's trying to tell us. And I just want to acknowledge that. I
Mm.
love that you're focusing on this because it shows up in so many different ways that I've seen in my practice and in training thousands of others in their practices.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I'm curious if people want to find you, if they want to know more about your trainings or, more about you, how do they do that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. My personal website, andreanakayama.com, and on all the socials, Andrea Nakayama. That will lead you to articles like the medicine and belonging and being moved and the work that I am doing in the realm of the intersection of narrative medicine and functional medicine. And it'll also lead you back to the Functional Nutrition Alliance, which is the brand that I've founded and where we have full body systems where we train. I've trained over 8,500 practitioners in over 68 countries and people who aren't practitioners but wanting to serve others as well. So Andrea Nakayama will lead you to all the things, all the places, easiest one stop shop.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I appreciate your taking the time to be here on the podcast. And I hope listeners will check out all your stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Well, I just loved that conversation with Andrea Nakayama. Just a beautiful soul, but also the work that she's doing to sort of open up our awareness to and training others to really incorporate so much more into diagnosis and medicine and our medical and our treatment, really, ultimately our treatment. Because I think so often we get stuck in the like, this pill is going to fix it, or this whatever protocol is going to make this thing be fixed and I'm going to be cured versus my body is a system and there are so many things that are impacting this system that how can I incorporate all of this to achieve optimal health for myself and support myself when things are not going as well. So I just want to say that I feel like this is so important for our physical health, but our mental health too. That there are so many alternative treatments, but treatments, holistic treatments that are effective and supportive and work for us as highly sensitive women. And in particular, I am super passionate these days about energy healing because I think as highly sensitive women, we can tend to live in a more sympathetic state, sort of because we can get so overwhelmed so easily by environmental stimuli that our systems can be on too much, right? And that then impacts our physical health. And so I think the energy healing, I just completed a Reiki master training. And like, I think bringing that energy work into the functional medicine, bringing it into our mental health work, that is it just feels really, really, really important. Um, so I hope you will check out her website. I hope you'll check out her uh, all the stuff she's putting out into the world. And it was really once again just amazing to me to connect with someone and be able to go so deep so quickly and to feel so connected. yeah, like she said, talking about that sense of belonging, it just helps me feel like a more important part of the world or a bigger piece of the world. So, anyway, I hope you all will take care of your bodies and your minds and your health and your well being. And I look forward to connecting with you next time here on the podcast. If you want to know more about working with me, you can find it at elizabethcushcoaching.com. Coaching is such a weird word. I am leaning toward uh, taking that out of my marketing materials to just, I feel like I'm less of a coach than more of a guide, more of a supporter. But if you want to know more about working with me, whether it's in therapy or guidance, you can find me at elizabethcushcoaching.com.